biggest opinion, the biggest thing with Parks Board.
Call to order the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission regular meeting, June 27, 2017. Let the record show that Commissioner Mann is not present this evening. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of May 23. Do I have a motion?
I can't motion.
I will make the motion that we accept the minutes on 23 of May meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the part where we accept public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of the Planning Commission meeting. Do I have any takers in the audience? Seeing none, I'll close that part of the meeting. The next item is our public hearings and meetings. And the first public hearing is the sign code. And Associate Planner Ray Lindenberg will help us with this. And I am mindful that we need to reopen the public hearing this time when appropriate. Ray?
Members of the Planning Commission, I'm bringing you once again a copy of our temporary sign code, or our proposed temporary sign code. Since the last time, we had a quick discussion about the content thereof. You'll see that the copy that you have in your packet there is not significantly changed, but we did do some tweaks based on some of that conversation we had. A couple of the high notes of the changes that we made. I included a total square footage limit for single-family residential properties and the kind of stick signs. And there was a comment regarding if the larger A-frame signs were allowed, why weren't we going to allow the smaller A-frame signs? And my comment on that, I didn't change anything in there, but my comment on that is the larger A-frame signs refers to a maximum size. So anytime you have any of these signs, that's just a maximum size. So if you wanted to do a smaller A-frame sign, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. So kind of going through the staff report there, like I said, not a lot has changed other than the kind of details that go into the actual code there. Staff believes that the changes that we have made reflects the needs of the community, the discussion that we've had. We will be going forth and discussing more with our stakeholders in the period of time between now and that August City Council meeting. It is going to go to the City Council workshop tomorrow, and so we'll have a chance to discuss that with the City Council tomorrow, get input from them, kind of go through and do some final polishing and stuff like that as we get towards August. But again, I will be approaching some of our community stakeholders in that period of time and continuing to polish and discuss and kind of go through it with a very fine-tooth comb, look for those loopholes, look for that devil's advocate, kind of how can this be abused kind of situation. So if you do have any additional comments or additional changes, etc., definitely let me know. There's going to be a little bit more time to go through that. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to assist this evening. Otherwise, my email address. Definitely get in touch with me.
So thank you, Ray. At this time, I think I'll open the public hearing and solicit any comment that anybody in the public might have. And if there being none there, then I can ask the commissioners if they have anything that they would like to discuss. Or questions.
We talked last time about including some kind of requirement to have the sign ownership or something on signs, and I think some of us thought that at least for signs that are in the public right-of-way, maybe that would be appropriate so that you know, if there's a random sign advertising a
Yeah.
gun show or something else that doesn't get taken up after the event, then we know who to call to come get them.
Okay.
Did you have any other thought about that?
You know, and that was, I think that's been part of kind of our discussion as far as whether or not we're going to require permits on these. The problem with that is that we can have that requirement in here, but if somebody from out of town comes in with their gun show signs or whatever it might be, that might not catch them. But at the same time, maybe if we put that section in the code that says if you don't have that sticker on there, then it has to be removed. Again, it's an enforcement versus, you know, how much do we want to, is there a problem kind of situation. But that one is kind of on my list of possible additions. There's a couple of minor little things that I would possibly add on there. If we feel like that this is a definite need or that there's a problem with existing signs now, then that's certainly something that we can add in there. It's not any issue at all to do that, so.
Well, I think certainly in the summer months, you know, some of these garage sale boxes that are sitting out in the public rights of way, you know, they just don't disappear after the weekend's over.
Mhm. Yeah,
But again, who knows whether they would actually put any information on them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In going through this, you know, I see the titles removed, like political campaign sign, real estate signs, and things like this. But basically, in a sense, we're not changing anything. We're just, you know, deleting the content requirements, et cetera.
yeah,
It's a good, you know, thought as far as assigning ownership or whatever, but you're just adding another layer. We have nobody to enforce these codes as it is right now. It's by complaint issuance only. So rather than expand a problem, all we're doing is trying to become in compliance with federal law. And I think we're doing that with what we have here. And I just think the other part of it might be more burdensome and cumbersome. And just even that little ownership sign piece of it just adds cost to an existing, which could be a stumbling block for the stakeholders that's in this, because it's all based on cost. So, I mean, that's my thought. I thought it was very well, you know, prepared, and I've read the comments and were brought up before, and it's understandable. But
yeah. I could honestly see it going either way.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, like, don't want to necessarily put it up for a vote, but if there's opinions strongly either way, you know, that's certainly something we can consider and something we can discuss with the city council as well.
Well, I personally think that you go and you just take a tour of the city right now, you'll find it's amazing how many signs there are out there that are maverick signs, unprofessional, signs that point to a business that's 3 blocks away. I mean, all kinds of things, but, you know, we tend to either have a blind eye to that or, like you said, it's not enforceable and somebody, you know, raises a snit about it. And I don't know the exact answer either, but I feel that, to Hal's point, these garage sale signs, they never disappear. People don't go pick them up after the 2-day garage sale. And I don't know why that's so difficult, but then again, I don't know how you enforce that either.
Yeah, and you know, on Friday, I went to a sign code boot camp about these kinds of issues. You know, how do we handle the town of Gilbert decision, the Supreme Court decision. Some of the cities are, you know, kind of approaching it. I think it was Gig Harbor was saying that they pretty much just don't allow temporary signs. To a certain extent, they'll allow a few, but they've cut it off to the point where, you know, they don't have this problem because they just don't allow them. Whereas other cities, you know, pretty much it's a free for all, and it depends on where Oak Harbor wants to be. What kind of city do we want to be? Do we want to, you know, cut down on and say, no, you can't do that? Do we want to be a little bit more free? Do we just let them go, you know? So it's kind of a philosophical thing. What do we want to do with them? I get the impression we want to kind of go down the middle there to allow for some freedom for business owners and yard sale people and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you know, not just let it be Wild West, everything, you know, is in play, so.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I move to recommend to the City Council adoption of ordinance number 1809, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code Section 19.36.080, temporary and special signs as proposed.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. I will now close that part of this public hearing. Next item is the Senior Planner Dennis Lefebvre will bring forward the Critical Areas Ordinance update, and this too will be a public hearing, and I will open that at the appropriate time. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Dennis Lefebvre, Senior Planner. Tonight's discussion is another presentation on the Critical Areas Ordinance that we've been working on for the last several months. And as I have done in the past presentations, kind of opened up the discussion with why are we here? Why are we looking at our Critical Areas Ordinance? Well, RCW 3670A130 requires that the city periodically review and revise, if needed, development regulations to ensure internal consistency with our comprehensive plan primarily, and conformance with state law. So that says we have to look at our development regulations on a periodic basis, and one of the big pieces that we have to look at is our critical areas mandated by the state. So we have been doing that for the course of the last 6 months or so. And as a refresher, there are 5 pieces of the critical areas that the state mandates that we put in our development regulations for protection. They're critical aquifer recharge areas, frequently flooded areas, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, geologically hazardous areas, and wetlands. And fortunately, through the course of the last 6 months, we've had an opportunity to present at 3 meetings. We've had a number of documents come forth before you that have kind of dealt with some of the key aspects of this planning effort, including where we have been as a history with critical areas ordinance, the definitions for all 5 of the critical areas. We've identified where in our code we have general regulations that kind of oversee all 5 of the critical areas. We've talked about how we are using the best available science, which is a mandate by the state that we incorporate into this update. We also had a document that showed how we are in conformance and implementing our 2016 comprehensive plan goals and policies. We also discussed how this layer of critical area regulations is coordinated with our shoreline master program. And we also went through and did a kind of a highlight level of what we are looking at as far as review and amendments for each of the critical areas. So with that said, procedurally, this is a non-project State Environmental Policy Act checklist that we prepared. We issued a determination of non-significance in April. That DNS was circulated to actually several federal agencies, state agencies, a number of the tribes that have influence in our area, and local jurisdictions as well. We had a comment period associated with that DNS. We have not received any comments from any of those agencies. Excuse me. We also submitted our 60-day requirement for notification to the Department of Commerce. We sent that out early May, so we are hitting that time frame. We also placed our draft ordinance on the city's webpage. We did that in the end of May. And we also did a legal notification for this public hearing before the Planning Commission. It is important to note that we are moving forward and have scheduled with the City Council July 5th, which is next Wednesday, for their public hearing based on this recommendation this evening. As I noted last month, we did actually submit 2 chapters to the state agencies. We submitted the wetlands chapter to the Department of Ecology. We submitted the Fish and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Area chapter to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Last month, we had not received any comments back. This month, we do have comments back, and we have incorporated those comments into this second draft of the ordinance, which is part of your packet. Tonight's packet, which is The second draft of the ordinance includes all of the comments that we've received up to this point. The second attachment in your packet is a document that highlights and identifies each of the changes from the first draft of the amendment, which was in your packet last month, to this ordinance. So it's kind of the bridge document from last month to this month, so you wouldn't have to try to figure out where the revisions were made between the two documents. And also, as a third attachment, we included a completed Department of Commerce checklist. I think if you recall, I submitted a checklist in your packet back in January. They were revising that checklist as we spoke, completed it in April, so we went ahead and went through and filled out that checklist to make sure that we basically were able to check the boxes where the state was going to make sure that we updated our critical areas in conformance with their requirements. That checklist is attachment 3. As I noted, sometimes with an amendment of this size, there are sometimes last-minute adjustments that we have to make. We had a suggestion from our engineering department that we look at a section in our geologically hazardous areas that dealt with stormwater in the vicinity of a steep or unstable slope, and to add some additional wording that would kind of clarify our position, maybe strengthen our position when that situation arose. So they recommended some wording. That is part of your Exhibit A, which I placed in front of your chairs. We are recommending as staff that we include that as part of this ordinance. And also, as part of that Exhibit A, we are suggesting a revised motion to include that Exhibit A. So now that I have you totally confused, I would be happy to respond to any of the questions that you may have.
So this Exhibit A replaces
It's a new section.
the new, or is it new?
It's an addition
It's a
to
new section.
that chapter.
Okay.
Yes, and it deletes a small section of another section in that chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It provides some additional,
Page 36
Okay.
of that package.
yeah. And that has not been reflected in the second draft of the ordinance that you have in your packet. That's why we have a special document just for that
Yeah,
exhibit.
because the section goes from 30 to section 43. So this will apply. It'll be,
Then at the bottom of that sheet, we have a revised motion to include that if you so choose to include that wording.
So we lined through that. It's 36, yeah.
so it goes from.
It will be adding a
30
new
to going
section,
here.
Oh, okay.
that
Yeah,
.035, so that's why it may be a little
Yeah.
confusing.
0.035 is its own section.
yeah. It's also changed in 40, which is at the bottom.
Why, okay.
It's just.
It was a
this is gonna
little
require a
redundant.
motion on
Why
this
do
one
you
as
have to
well,
be, why does it have to be incorporated in the motion, though?
Well,
this-
because it's not
because
part
it's
of the
not part of
ordinance
it.
itself. Yeah, so it's an additional,
It's not part of the proposed ordinance.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah. But if you reference Exhibit A, it becomes a piece of that.
Any questions?
I gotta tell you, this one put me to sleep. Several times.
Oh,
I tried to break your heart, but I mean, it was just trying to compare and go back. There's a lot of work to it, you know, I understand that. And this, I have no questions.
Al?
So I asked last time about the use of the word manipulation, which I don't like the connotation of. But I see that you chose not to make any changes on that. Is that Is that a,
There was a reason for that. I double-checked the sample ordinance from the Department of Ecology, their definitions, and the terminology that we kept was what they used, so,
to remain consistent?
yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of strange because on the page prior, it was changed, so. My big question is, and hopefully you'll be able to answer this easily. In the chapter 20.24 tables A, B, and C, the buffers have changed significantly, like by 50% bigger buffers. And you know, I did some Google mapping of some of our, you know, areas in town, and if you change something from a 200 to a 300-foot buffer, I mean, it may make a lot of our properties unusable, if I'm understanding how this works correctly. Is this something where our previous chart was just changed at the state level and we don't have any choice but to change it, or?
Well, essentially, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Ecology stance is increasing the buffer to maintain that function value and wildlife habitat value of the buffer itself, so that the wetland, you know, is intact. The 300-foot buffer that you indicated is for a Category 1 wetland, which is like the top of the line wetland. Quite honestly, I don't think we have in town a Category 1 wetland.
Well, and that's one of the problems that I have, is that using the county website is, it doesn't tell you what the categories of the wetlands are, but, you know, I know that the sewer plant's putting in a new wetland, or that they're kind of adjusting the one that's there. I have no clue what category it is, but it could certainly affect all those properties that are on Pioneer that back up to it.
Well, that is in fact the case. And Ecology has pretty much mandated what the buffer width is for the city of Oak Harbor. In fact, I proposed smaller buffers as part of the revision that we sent to Ecology, and they came back and said, these are the ones that they are recommending for us.
I'd be happy to jump in.
Sure, go ahead, Steve.
So the wetland along that common boundary between Windjammer Park and those commercial properties to the north is not a Category 1 wetland. It would be of the lowest quality because it just does not have the functions and values that you would expect or that you need in a Category 1 wetland. Those are typically the something that's going to have open water with now I can't think of all the right words. Much more of an environment and a habitat. So the 7th Avenue wetland that we have is the highest category wetland that we've had in the past, and I'm not sure that one would meet the definition of a Category 1. And then so the enhanced wetland that we're doing adjacent to the clean water facility would be a low quality wetland as well.
So the 7th Avenue one, if the buffer in fact is 300 feet on that hits the office max. That hits the greenhouse place there on 7th. You know,
It used to meet the old definition of a Type A wetland. I'm not knowledgeable enough, Hal, to tell you whether or not off the top of my head it would meet the one, but also then, as Dennis has explained to you in various workshops, your buffer is also then determined by the intensity of the land use adjacent to it. And then our fail-safe, if you want to think about it in that particular fashion, is that and this applies to any critical area, if the regulations are so onerous as to completely remove economic use of the property, then we have those reasonable use exceptions that are built in, right, that say, okay, wait a minute, these rules are too much, they're overwhelming this piece of property, and that's when we take it to the hearing examiner and get that determination, and then we determine how to make it best work. So I think your concern is a good one, because anytime we see increased buffer widths, I think we just naturally get nervous. But I think our best opinion at this time is that we won't find ourselves in a situation where we are applying these extra large buffers, because we just won't have those situations.
okay, thank you.
You know, I'm remiss, but at this time, I think I'll open the public hearing.
Good
And then we'll put this, the rest of this on record as a part of the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that has any comment they would like to make?
Would our county staff person like to talk?
Okay, so seeing none, we will carry on. Commissioner Cecil, do you have a?
Yes, I do. Who determines the category 1, 2, 3, et cetera?
Upon a development proposal, there would be a requirement that a wetland biologist professional would go out and actually do a delineation and a typing of that wetland that may be in the vicinity or even on the site itself. So we would have a professional do that type of identification.
Do we have documentation in the city on where category 2, 3, et cetera are?
Typically, that's not mapped at the state level. We normally only get down to that determination of the categories once we have site-specific applications. So you get some idea maybe through the National Wetland Inventory Map. We might be able to get some level of information from statewide ecology mapping, but you really only get down to truly understanding the type of wetland you have and where its boundaries are once they've gone through first the reconnaissance process. Is there in fact a wetland here? They look for the soil type, the presence of the water, and the plant life type. That's generalization as to how that works. And once they've figured out that yes, there's something there to deal with, then they actually go through and delineate, determine where the boundary of that is. And through that process, following the prescribed methods of the wetland manual, they determine what category wetland it is, and then that's what dictates how we respond to it. But you don't know until you know, I guess is the short way of saying it.
I got it. And, I mean, unfortunately, it makes sense because of dollars. I mean, 'cause it
Yeah.
is expensive
Yeah.
to do something like that, and until it's going to be developed, you're really not putting the money into it to find out what it is. Okay, but thanks. That answered my question.
Well, the way I understood it, Ray, was that, this is development driven. That you get a set of plans. Okay, that's what triggers all this investigation, these reports and studies and all of that. So, I mean, that's what I read, and I read that it was a state document, and that's the way I took it.
That's
But-
pretty accurate, yes.
Yeah. And it's just a situation where, manpower, it'd be nice to know what these categories would be if we have them in our city. I didn't think we had a category 1 in our city. I mean, category 1's a large area. But, I saw it as a state document, a regulation, and then it's driven by a permit, when a permit is, or an application is submitted. Okay, that triggers all these questions, the checklist. The checklist pays a lot of attention to that information. Okay, that's how you determine what it is.
Exactly.
And what you need as an applicant to move forward on, or whether you want to move forward on it. Thank you.
So any other discussion? If not, I'll close this portion of the public hearing, and I'll call for a motion if someone has a motion.
I move to recommend to the city council approval of ordinance number 1801 as amended by Exhibit A, updating the City of Oak Harbor critical area development regulations.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Don't we also need to make a motion on the attachment A or Exhibit
I
A?
think we
That
did.
was Exhibit A
It was
included in your motion.
Okay,
Was
very good.
included in the motion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda this evening is the comprehensive plan amendment, park plan update. This is a public meeting, and Senior Planner Kat Kamak will direct this portion of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Kat Kamak, Senior Planner. So this is kind of my third presentation on the park plan update. So I put all my slides in one presentation, so I can quickly skim over some of the previous information just to kind of get the commission caught up on that. Again, Parks Recreation Open Space Plan is part of it's an element of the comprehensive plan. So The structure is kind of designed to meet the state GMA requirements. We kind of did a tier approach. The past two presentations touched on Tier 1 and Tier 2, and tonight I'm hoping to touch upon Tier 3 of the plan. The plan includes long-term strategies and strategies not really intended to all happen within the 6-year time period of the plan. A lot of them accomplished over several years and several updates. So this is the basic structure of the plan. Tier 1 has some of the moreover the vision and the guiding principles, the goals and policies, and also the recommended plan. Tier 2 is kind of the workhorse of the document. It has all the existing conditions and the level of service analysis and level of attention, which is also the maintenance type approaches for our plan. Has the 6-year plan as well, and then the Tier 3 has the administrative policies, which we'll go over today a little bit. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. We'll come back to some of these as we are amending the plan and take a closer look at it. But of course, the park plan has a vision, and with every update, we can take a look at it and see if we need to amend it, change directions, tweak it. We'll try and do that with this update. Guiding principles are, these are general goals and policies that are in most plans, the feel-good stuff. We're just following one of the national park plan structures and have it all in one place. These are kind of timeless statements. When I was presenting this information about the guiding principles to the park board, there was a good comment. One of the commissioners mentioned that we don't have anything to state, preserving historical and cultural resources or just the history through our park plan, and I don't have any statements in there in our guiding principles to that. So it's a good catch, and so we'll kind of amend that and add some of those statements in there. The goals, planning goals, they're a compilation from previous goals, so what we have in the current plan is just not what we just came up with in 2008. They are 20 years worth of goals and plans all the way back to 1989. So we're just transferring that information and continuing it. The goals could be different. They could be construction related, acquisition or approvals. So we went through all of this. Tier 2, we looked at the inventories of all our existing facility. That's something that we do every update, the level of service and level of attention. Look at the existing conditions. Things change over time. We want to track those. We'll do a survey. We'll do just a community needs assessment on the quality, quantity of parks and such. We'll update our impact fees this time, and we'll also go through and we'll look at the 6-year goals that we selected in 2008. Actually, we'll look at them today, but with the next, with the update, we'll look for what do we want to do over the next 6 years. So that'll be a good exercise. Inventory, it's got all the city parks, but it also kind of captures all the other facilities that we have in and around Oak Harbor, because people in the city use, not limited to city boundaries, so we got county parks and state parks, and so we've noted those and kind of incorporated some of them into our inventory. Level of service, just like transportation, we have level of service for parks. We do it in 2 ways. We do spatial and ratio. Spatial is based on distances that they can serve. Neighborhood parks, half mile, and a community park is a mile. And then we have trails as well, and we've kind of established a half-mile radius for trails as a level of service. This is kind of the breakdown of how you categorize level of service for our parks. And so you can see, if you have 80% of the city within half mile of a trail, you can call that a good level of service 1. So on with neighborhood parks. If you have 90% of the city within a half mile of a neighborhood park, it's pretty good service, and so do community parks. We looked at some of the maps of our existing parks and saw the coverage, spatial coverage on what they cover. And as you can see on the left, it's community parks coverage. And you can see the northwest part of town does not have coverage from a community park. So something that the plan has noted as an area that we could potentially look for a future park in that area, so that everybody's not driving south. I mean, the city's going to grow west and south a little bit, but if we have all our resources towards the south, then you can just imagine that, you impact the transportation as well. All these plans are interrelated, so you want to have them distributed. Trails, of course, the waterfront trail is the only kind of defined trail we have in the city, and with a half-mile coverage, a lot of the city does not have access. It's not within walking distance, so we'll have to develop some strategies on that. The plan does recommend looking into that further, and so we'll have to continually work on that to improve that for the city. Neighborhood parks, we looked at this a little bit. We do have a lot of neighborhood parks in the city, half-mile coverage, but one of the qualifiers we have is the neighborhood park should be accessible. You want to send your kids from home to a neighborhood park. You don't want them to cross major streets and put themselves in any harm while getting to the park. So we kind of cut the circles, the coverage area with all the major dividers, and all the orange areas we found are areas that we actually don't have pretty good service with our neighborhood parks. So where are we with our level of service? Spatially based for trails, we're at level of service 4. Neighborhood parks, we're at level of service 3. And community parks, we're at level of service 2. So that's our current level of service. Ratio-based approach, this is a number-based approach based on population. How many acres do you want to have in terms of community park to serve your population and neighborhood parks. So we did both the analysis to find where we have deficiencies. This is kind of a table that shows the progression of neighborhood parks and community parks from 2000 and then 2008. We'll do something similar again this year just to see how we're progressing. And we also do the ratio-based level of service for the facilities that we have in our parks. And so we'll go through this and reevaluate it based on our population growth and if we've added any facilities since 2008. Level of attention is just a maintenance level. This is ranked from 1 to 6. And this is just a tool available in the plan when we want to talk about, the level of maintenance we want for parks. So, for example, Windjammer Park is a great example. The community's making a lot of investment in that park. And as we go forward, there's interest in having that park at a certain level. And what does that mean? How much time, how much resources does that take? So we have to look into that. And this is a tool for trying to assess and having a discussion about it, just so that the community knows what it takes to maintain parks and what's needed. So the existing conditions kind of keep a catalog of all the existing parks. It tracks the level of attention that they're getting, improvements needed. Our equipment over time gets rusty and needs to be replaced. So we make note of all of that in the existing conditions. And we did the community survey last round and have some stats on that. I went over these at the last meeting. We'll do another similar survey. The plan recommends a similar survey. We'll probably tweak it a little bit just to kind of capture some interests of what the City Council and the Park Board want to know, along with the as the community has grown. So we'll try and capture as much as possible with the survey. Tier 3. So this is what I'd like to cover in this meeting. Tier 3 is just administrative policies, and we've separated the administrative policies from the rest of the section because the GMA requires all these plan amendments to be done once a year as part of your comp plan amendment. And if we throw all our policies into the plan and something happens, we want to make a change, we don't have to wait for the comp plan amendment process to go through. So we created the Tier 3 administrative policies and kind of have that as a separate chapter. So if we wanted to make some changes in mid-year, we can do that without having to do a real plan amendment. These are policies that kind of help our Parks Division develop work programs. They help us make recommendations to the City Council and also help with just internal decisions and guidance when we deal with parks. What does it have? It has a general category and just kind of calls out when updates should be done, how to link it to the CIP, to get projects that are in the plan into the CIP, to include public participation, and also has some general policies on acquisition and to incorporate education into our parks and all that. Level of service policies, it has, what level or what standards of should these facilities be in order to be considered into the level of service analysis. And then it also talks about maintenance and staffing levels and level of attention. So these are all policies in the administrative section of it. Neighborhood parks, it has minimum requirements, compatibility with neighborhoods. This is what we look at when a development comes forward and they say, we want to have a park in our development. We say, well, okay, it's a neighborhood park. It has to be this minimum dimension. It has to have 30 foot of frontage. All of that is contained in this section. Same thing with community parks. Talks about location. You want to try and locate community parks and on arterial streets if possible. They're traffic generators and you don't want to put them somewhere where it's going to impact the neighborhood. So you have some minimum standards you want to look at. You want to provide parking, etc. So open space, this is a parks, recreation, and open space plan. So we have some policies regarding that, mostly open spaces for preservation and protection focus. So try to have some standards in there when we look at that. Again, trails is, there's different kinds of trails. You can have trails, natural trails in natural settings, but you can also have trails along streets and stuff. So we categorized, if you look at the policies, there are different standards for natural trails and then what you would have along the streets. So we've captured that. They mostly kind of reflect WSDOT standards. So if WSDOT standards change, we don't have to do a plan amendment to change them. We can just go into the administrative policies and change them. Financial policies, again, deals with the impact fees and talks about how, during development, if you can provide land, dedication in lieu of the impact fees, and other user fees for programs that use the park and so on. So these financial policies capture some of that. And we have some environmental policies as well, just listing a bunch of environmental friendly practices that the city can take on as we maintain and develop parks. So that's kind of the tier 3, covers all the administrative policies. That section is in your plan. We'll look at some of these as I'm discussing these with the commissions and boards. I'm also having an internal discussion with the Parks Department, and we've identified some of these that need to be updated and amended. So when we come back and go through over the next couple months through the amendment process, we'll talk about some of the changes that we're making to some of these sections. So the 2008 6-year goals, what do we have and what have we done, and where some things were successful and others are still pending. So some of the goals that were selected in 2008 was to, the waterfront trail at that time, and the extension to Mailer Point was a key thing that the community was focused on trying to do, and so that was part of the plan. And as we know, that link was made. We had an agreement with the Navy to put some trash cans out there, put some signage, but of course they reserve the right to close it whenever there's a security issue, which is completely okay. But at least we do have access and maintain somewhat of an access to it so that people can walk all the way to Mailer Point. So that was one of the most successful goals that in 2008. Upland facilities at Flintstone Park, this was it was still ongoing in 2008 when we adopted the plan, but I think a couple of years after, maybe in 2010, The community did decide not to pursue that project, but they did make a key decision to still keep it in the plan. They didn't want to completely eliminate the idea. It just wasn't feasible at that time, so they said, let's take it out of the CIP, but let's keep it in the park plan. So, but that's still in the plan. Another goal was to develop a regional ballpark complex to attract tournament-level sports competition. This is, again, I think it's more of a baseball diamond type facility. The community still has a need for such a facility. It's just a matter of timing, opportunity, land, funds all coming together. I can see this goal continuing to stay for the next 6 years, but having this in the plan has kept it in front of the community and staff, so we look for opportunities every time we can advance these goals. And actually, in the past budget, there was some money allocated in trying to see if we can actually acquire some land on that. So there are things moving in that, but so I see that staying on this cycle's goal for the next 6 years. Again, this is another goal that was part of the 2008, is to continue to develop programs, maybe in collaboration with the North Woodby Recreation District for teenagers, senior citizens, and retirees. This is an ongoing thing, and I think it'll stay on the next cycle of plans as well. Explore options to increase revenue for parks, recreation trails, and open space projects. This is something that the city is continually looking for opportunities. You just want to have that as part of the goal, just in case there was a situation where you could identify a different source of revenues to do that. I don't think we had in the last 6 years any chance or any reason to try and look at it, but it was one of the things that was in the goals. Design and build trails around the 7th Avenue Wetlands Tract. This is, again, one of the goals that is a carryover from the previous 2001 plan, I think. And I think this is still a viable option. Again, it's funds and opportunity and resources coming together to make it happen. We've had some requests from neighboring subdivisions to the west of 7th Avenue wetlands on some trail connections, and asking the city whether the city wanted to have some connections there from the subdivisions. So since it's in the plan, we follow up and look at real opportunities. But in the future, as time and resources would allow, that's a nice area, a natural area within the city, in a highly populated, intense area, that it would be beneficial to have some trails. And we know we're lacking trails in the community, so I can see this staying on the next cycle as well. Open space was one of the big things that came out of the community survey as something that we still want to have in Oak Harbor. So having a goal there to find opportunities where you can identify and preserve open space is always a good thing. Work with Island County to identify areas for preserving areas outside the city's UGA and the joint planning area. This is always good practice whenever we have the opportunity to do that. We know we have some wetlands and other open space areas around the UGA that could benefit from this goal when the opportunity does arise. Trails was another big thing. Well, we've identified from our analysis that we do need trails, but that was another big thing that was indicated in the survey. People wanted trails. So, connecting parks, neighborhoods, and of course having sidewalks or some way of safe way to get to downtown and other activity areas would be good. So I'll go through the recommended plan that kind of identifies and captures some of this. The marina is also part of the parks plan. It's a recreational asset for the city, so we do have some goals that relate to that as well. So to the recommended plan, so this is kind of one of the recommendations that came out of the plan 2008. You know, the circles are basically kind of identifying key assets and kind of focal points that you want to try and connect with the trail. So the waterfront trail connects Windjammer Park, Flintstone Park, goes along Pioneer Way, Skagit Valley College, Marina. These are all great assets to tie together with the trail. And then you have that brown shaded area in downtown, which is where you, it's just identified in the park plan that anytime you have an opportunity, a project or anything in this area, street project, let's say, you want to try, you don't want to think twice about adding some pedestrian facilities. This park plan will give you the support to say, look, you know, this has been identified as something that we need, and when we do a project, we should just add that component while we're designing the project. Another key area that's identified in the city that could use trail connections and other improvements is the Whidbey Avenue corridor. So Whidbey Avenue corridor is Whidbey Avenue is one of the key streets that actually goes east to west in the city. And along this corridor is a lot of major facilities. Most of our schools are located just on either side of Whidbey, and so is the fire station. So it's a very key kind of a street that ties a lot of our infrastructure or a lot of our facilities together. So having trails or sidewalks connect to Whidbey Avenue would be beneficial, because once you get on Whidbey Avenue, then you can get to these facilities. So it's just identifying that as an area. Again, when you do street projects and stuff, when they did Oak Harbor Road improvements, you know, identified easily that needed a multi-use trail. I mean, so those are things that that we rely on, these park plan and other plans, transportation plans, to support our project scope when we do go out and look for these. This is another long-term kind of a planning vision for Oak Harbor related to trails and parks. And if my pointer would work, which it doesn't right now. So all the purple circles are kind of key elements. You know, you have Mailer Point, Windjammer Park, and then the, come on. Nope, doesn't want to work today. West of Highway 20 along 24th, you know, we have a few circles. We have Fort Nugent Park, and we have some wetlands there that are identified. Those are all things that, natural areas that you can, oh, thank you. Okay. So this area, so Mailer Point, Windjammer Park, and then we have these natural features here. You can imagine if we can connect all of those through some trails, either through streets or however, we'll start to form a network. And then you cross Fort Nugent Road, you get into maybe the golf course, or maybe with new development, you can link more trails, multi-use trails along some major streets, connected to, you know, what is now known as the Fakima Farm area. And from there, you can have trails, maybe go through natural areas. And we have Swantown Lake, it's a natural area. We have Joseph Whidbey State Park, which is a natural area. You come back through Crosby, and we have some wetlands here, potential for more trails connected to the maybe the wetlands that are along Crosby and Heller. And then along 16th Avenue, you have the 7th Avenue wetlands, and then more connections here. We have the Navy property and the natural areas here, and Regatta Avenue is a great way to connect in. So this is really long term. If we do street projects, or if we can, when the county does street projects and we can collaborate with them, we can start to make these small connections that eventually, you know, 30, 40 years from now, you'll start to develop a trail network that then people can use, the community can use, and get around the city. So this is a long-term vision. You know, again, this is something goes back to that tier one. It's not all meant for the 6-year update. It's meant as a long-term. And as long as you set a vision and a long-term path, with every update, you get to check it. And if you want to add something more, or if you want to change something, you can look at that. But I don't see too many changes occurring to this since, you know, growth hasn't demanded anything different. But that's kind of one of the long-term goals in order to get a trail connection all around the city. So I think that is my last slide. Yes, it is. Oops, sorry. So that kind of sums up what we have in our existing plan. We're hoping to get the survey out in the next couple weeks to the public and have that promoted for input. We'll probably give people a couple months all the way to August, September to fill those surveys. In the meantime, we'll go through and work with the various commissions and also City Council with the workshop on some of the changes to consider as part of the update. So we'll be coming back to the Planning Commission over the next couple months to talk about that as well. So any questions I can answer? All right.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cap. And the last item on the agenda this evening is a public meeting. It's going to be brought to us by Steve Powers, the Director of Developmental Services. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Wassinger, members of the commission. This is just a quick update for you on the countywide planning policies. We've mentioned this to you, I think, briefly in a couple of your pre-meeting agendas. My slide has gone away, so I'll just stretch my comments while we're waiting for that to come back. We have talked to you a little bit about that we've been engaged with our colleagues at the county. Nathan is one of the planners that we've been working on. Or working with, rather. We've maybe been working on it as well.
Yeah, maybe
Somewhat of a
little
Freudian
of both,
slip.
maybe, yeah.
He's been instrumental in helping us understand some of the changes that we're trying to consider here as a team. Your staff report gave you some quick updated information, reminded you that it was a little more than a year ago, about a year and a half ago, where we had the council adopt the countywide planning policies. That was after a substantial effort between the city and the county and others to draft those. We knew at that time that they weren't going to be carved in stone, that we had some more work to do. We've got about a year under our belt. It's time to start thinking about what some of those revisions might want to be. Thanks, Tim. So some of that is on the screen for you right now. One of the key things that really came out of the adoption last year was a process for calculating the buildable lands analysis. And it was one of our joint goals between the city and the county. Let's figure out this methodology in advance so that as we have to talk about the question of do we have enough capacity for growth in our urban growth area or in any of the others that the county has to deal with, we've already figured out what the steps are that we're going to use. So you don't spend time thinking about that, you spend time thinking about the actual analysis itself. So the city is very pleased that we ended up with getting that process in place. A little bit of background about this particular effort. You can read those slides. I won't insult your intelligence by reading them to you. This is just kind of an attempt at a graphic that tries to show you where the countywide planning policies fit in this overall GMA scheme that we talk to you about from time to time. So if we think of GMA as the overarching principle or thing we're trying to match, things start to fall out from underneath of that. So we need to have countywide planning policies. It tells us that in GMA. Even if it didn't, it'd be a pretty good idea anyway, where we have shared responsibilities for planning and for thinking ahead for our communities. Makes good sense for us to have policies that help us figure that out. Sort of off to the side there are interlocal agreements. Those are a companion, a partner of the countywide planning policies. The policies kind of tell us the framework we're going to use. The interlocal agreement gives us the nuts and bolts about how we're going to go about implementing different pieces of it. The countywide planning policies, in turn, inform our comprehensive plan. They inform how we determine the boundary of the joint planning area, which then helps us figure out how we're going to have UGAs. And ultimately, it all boils down to development regulations and what are the things that we apply on any particular piece of property when that citizen comes in and asks us about it. A little graphic that Lisa put together for us today that really just shows we're not in this alone. We're working with Island County. They, of course, have the large task of trying to balance the needs of the other municipalities as well. So we have a uniform set of countywide planning policies. Not all of them are going to, we have uniformity across them in the areas in which we have common interests. But obviously our UGA is different than the one in Langley, different than the one in Coopville, so we have some different needs as well. This map, I think, kind of gives you a good idea, sums it up with I'm going to need that pointer again, please. Graphically represents what it is we're really talking about. So as you know, the yellow shaded area represents city limits. Again, somewhat of an anomaly when we talk about the seaplane base being in the city limits, but as you are well aware, while it's technically part of our city, technically part of our urban growth area, we lack any real planning authority over there, but we show it for consistency's sake. So when we talk about the city limits and the city's UGA where we have some influence, it's this area here. The shaded area is, the shaded purple area rather, are those areas which are inside of our urban growth area, but still are in unincorporated Island County. So those are the areas that over time we are expected to annex, and that's where we're accommodating our residential growth as well as our commercial and industrial growth. The black line out here denotes the boundaries of the joint planning area. So that's that next ring, if you will, that next tier of thought process. Those are places where we say to ourselves, jointly with the county, it's likely or it's possible that we could grow into those areas over time. Not sure exactly how that might take place or when that might take place, but it's an area that, whether it's because of our future growth or for other common interests, it makes sense for us to sort of think about those areas together. Big difference between the countywide planning policies that you helped us recently adopt and the previous set is that we didn't really spend much time in those previous ones talking about how we figured out how to think about those lands inside of the joint planning area. It was really a blank slate. So it didn't give us much direction in terms of, are some areas more prone to being part of the urban growth area, and are there some areas that we should just really avoid for particular reasons? So the policies that were adopted last year gave us some direction on that. We're proposing some additional refinements to that language to give us some better direction, some better criteria to make those decisions. And you can see that reflected in the legend that's part of your packet as well. So this is really what it's all about. It's the relationship between us and the county. How do we think about those properties outside of the existing urban growth area, inside of the joint planning area, and how might we think about bringing them into the city when and if we need them. So the county had prepared a very excellent detailed matrix that listed out the changes that we've been discussing with them. We've included in your packet. Summarized here are some of the main points. Definitions, we're fine-tuning those definitions, some greater consistency with the RCWs and with the Growth Management Act. Makes all the sense in the world. Let's tie them to things which have already been adopted at a different level so we have that consistency. A lot of discussion in the amendments about the joint planning area, categories, the criteria, and the policies that we might want to apply. We've also see some suggestions to fine-tune the methodology for the buildable lands analysis. I think the term that was used somewhere in our materials is ground truthing, or at least that's been in our conversations. How does the model that we put together really start to work as we look at the properties out there? And so there are some fine tunings that are proposed in there. We're working to review the materials that the county has provided to us. We've briefed the council at their workshop last month. We'll brief them again tomorrow, as a matter of fact. We look to provide any additional refinements or suggestions back to the county if necessary in July. We hope to come back to you a month from now for you to conduct a public hearing, and then we would follow up immediately with council action the next day if possible, and then ask the council to adopt a resolution that would forward this on to the county so that we can collectively put this piece of our process for this year to rest and move on to the rest of our respective dockets. So if I was going to sum this up in any couple of sentences, it's fine-tuning the concepts that were developed last year and simplifying in some areas so that it's just easier to understand and apply. I'd be happy to help you with your questions.
Questions?
I was not part of that process last year because I came on at the very, very end of it. So I'm going to ask a really basic question.
Sure.
The county uses a lot more colors of verbiage than we use in the city. So they've got red and blue and green. I think I understand what all the differences are, but for the benefit of anybody who may be watching on TV too who doesn't understand these things, could you please tell me what the difference between red language and blue language and green language is?
I think it's probably just so on the matrix itself, the blue language is the added language.
Okay.
The red is the strike through,
Okay.
and the green is really what happens when you have an embedded hyperlink in there. And so you would be able to click on this document and it would take you to that particular whack.
There's some areas in here where the green kind of makes it look like it's been moved or something from one section to another. I'm getting a head nod in the back row, so I guess that's what that means.
Okay.
And that's not in the matrix, that's in the,
In the actual document itself?
okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the only other comment I have is it's interesting that we just had the comments about the presentation about the parks plan, because it kind of makes me wonder, and I'm just not asking questions, I'm just saying that, you know, the idea of identifying open space in the parks plan is kind of at odds maybe with the county's, you know, buildable lands analysis, where they're counting open space as buildable land if it's not city-owned or church-owned or some of these other things. So just a comment.
We always are struggling to make sure that across all the different facets that we're dealing with, we try to make them consistent with each other. So it's a good comment. Thank you.
So, about the parks in the future, where does the North Whidbey Parks and Recreation come into play when it comes to county open space that could be designated for parks, or even the city for that matter, I guess?
We tend to take the perspective that if it's not controlled by the city, we don't count it as terms of meeting a particular need or level of service, because we're the only ones who can be sure of what we'll be doing with those particular properties. We tend to include other public agencies' holdings in our inventory because they are certainly utilized by the North Whidbey community. So we list the school district properties, we list North Whidbey Park and Rec, we may even make note of the Navy's opportunities for our citizens who can do that. But when it comes down to the number crunching, we'll only count those things that the city has control over.
Thank you.
So this was a high-level passover on this particular topic. We'll dive into it a little bit more for you next month. But we are really looking at this as it's a little more than housekeeping, but it's nowhere near the major overhaul, say, that Dennis needed to do with the critical areas code. So hopefully it's fairly easy to track, and we don't have a lot of big policy questions, but obviously we'll be more than willing to help you with those next month if you have them. Or in the meantime, just give me a shout and we can talk about it.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you.
Just to note that our next regular business meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 25th, 2017. And there being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.